Linux-only technology. Now, just this week, literally while I was winding up for this conference, which was useful, Docker have released some beta versions which make it easier to run Docker on Windows and OS X. You've been able to do so before, but what it would do is create a virtual machine, put Docker inside that, and then you could use that. If you want to go have a look or sign up for the Docker beta, you can go to beta.docker.com. This works much better than the old Docker toolbox. At least if you're in a Windows environment, it's much more like a native Linux environment for it. So at least from my point of view, that would be a good place to play around with Docker. Sign up for the beta, see if you can get access, and try that. So the basics. These are some of the basic sort of commands that you can run in Docker. Docker provides that should say Docker build. It's what I get for writing it quickly. You build an image, which creates your new Docker template or image. And from that image, you can run up as many instances of that Docker machine as you want, which is exactly what's happening on this live page. Is I have a pre-built Moodle image. Once I put in a new Moodle name, it goes onto the server, literally runs the Docker run command with my Moodle image, and that starts. Let me just swap back to screen sharing, and you'll be able to see here that the Gerwood Moodle instance I created earlier, I go to it, it's there, it's running, it's on, I can log in. I think I've actually forgotten the password, but anyway. All of that's running through Docker. If I jump onto the server, and Lindy, if you could keep an eye out and see it, let me know if anyone can't see it. I can type in Docker PS, which for those of you who are familiar with Linux is sort of the equivalent of the Linux PS command, and it shows me all my running instances. So you can see here from putting in Gerwood, it's launched my Gerwood container and it's running. It started up 3 minutes ago. And if I was to run Docker stop Gerwood, it would turn that Docker instance off. So your control for starting and stopping these containers is quite straightforward and quite simple once you become familiar with those commands. Other commands to be aware of: Docker images shows you all the images you've got. Docker stop will stop the container that you've built. Docker PS will show you. Yep, it will do that. If you do Docker run Ubuntu 16.04, it will give you a 16.04 environment very quickly. Startup, I think if you run -i-t that command in chat, you will basically get a running, 16.04. There is no 16.06. You'll get a Ubuntu 16.04 command line environment and be in the terminal and running very quickly. So once Docker's installed, you can do those sorts of things very quickly. It will remember images, things like Ubuntu. You don't need to know where to get them from. It will go and check back with the Docker repository or the Docker hub and download that image if it can find it there. So starting from an image like Ubuntu 16.04 is very easy, and you can do it pretty much just after you've installed Docker itself. And once you've done that, you can build off those images as well. I'll have links for where to go for the Docker hub and Docker documents at the end of the presentation. Now, let me know if this is a little hard to see. I was trying to get the entire Docker file onto the one screenshot, and I just got it there, but I had to make the font a little small. Okay, I will show you this through screen sharing, and that might make it a little easier to see. Okay, is that better to see? Better? Okay, so to build a Docker image, you create a Docker file. A Docker file is basically just like a script that the Docker build command just runs through, and it runs all of these commands in order until it has built a final image. What it will do is each command will be run in a separate container and then rolled over to the next one. So starting at the top, the from command allows me to use a base image, so I'm not starting from scratch, and just about any Docker file you see will probably have a from command. In my case, I've started with Ubuntu 16.04 because it just came out, and so I want to. I could also go to 14.04 and run it from there. You then generally have a maintainer, whoever authored this, their email address, and so on. An environment command will let you set an environment variable inside the container, and I use these later on so that you can externalize the database connection. So the Docker file I've built does include MySQL in it, does have an install of everything inside the container, so you don't need MySQL. But if you were running in production, you almost certainly wouldn't be putting your MySQL server inside the Docker container. That would not be particularly helpful. So as an example, a way of getting it out, you can put in environment variables to actually tell Docker or the container where the database is. In this case, I'm running apt-get update. Because the 16.04 image is raw, you do need to run that so that it will actually download the latest update information, and you can then run the install command. Then, just like you would if you were running inside Linux, I'm installing all the PHP libraries I need for Moodle. I'm installing a MySQL server. In this case, I've used Nginx rather than Apache, so sorry if you're not familiar with it. And I'm also installing Git and Supervisor and a DOS to Unix. I'll explain why I wanted those later. Next, I'm running a remove command because when Nginx sets up, it sets up a default file in the sites enabled, which I don't want. I'm only going to run Nginx out of Moodle out of this. I don't need the Nginx kind of default page. Now, then I make a directory. So each run command is the equivalent of being on a bash line and just typing a command. There is a small caveat to that, which I'll show you further down. I'm creating the Moodle data directory, so it's inside the container, also declaring that as a volume. That means that you will be able to see that on the host computer. So when Moodle shuts down, that data will still be there. Again, if you were doing this in production, you don't want your data trapped inside a single Moodle instance, and when the image goes away, the data goes away. You're going to want to put that on the host machine or on a shared drive or something like that. So you use volumes to help you do that. Volumes I'm a little light on, but effectively this will by default reserve that space and make it findable outside the container. You can override that volume yourself. So if you have a directory on Docker, if you have a directory externally on the host machine, you can link that in as the data directory. So we keep doing that all the way down, going through the script. You can download this from the site that I showed you earlier and have the complete Docker file that you should be able to use to build this Moodle image that I'm showing you here. I also clone out Moodle from Git, do a checkout so that I'm on the right branch. You could, of course, change that to whichever branch you like. So that could be Moodle 3.1, given that's out, or 2.9. I have to tell it to expose port 80, as in make port 80 on the Docker container visible so that we can get to the web server. Then I set up my environment variables. These are the environment variables I want to override when I'm starting the container. Then next, I'm initializing the database. Remember, this is being done when you build the container. This is not redone when you start. Sorry, this is being done when you build the image. It's not being redone when you start the container. It all becomes baked in, which is why the Docker container can start so quickly, because I've already set up the database to a default level. Copy in a number of files. You can see over here, I've got a number of pre-built files. The copy command lets me copy them into certain places inside that container environment or that image, and effectively help me manage and put in all the starting config. Now, the reason I set up DOS to Unix or added DOS to Unix is because I built this on my Windows machine. The file endings in the start.sh file were wrong, so I just cheated. Instead of making them right, I just used the DOS to Unix utility inside the environment and converted them back so it would run properly. Then finally, with pretty much every Docker container, or most likely with every Docker container, you run a final command. This is the thing usually that the Docker is going to do. So it might be the script that it's going to run, or the Nginx server, and so on. In my case, I want to do more than one thing. So I've told it to run a bash script, which then actually starts a lot of other processes. That starts Nginx and the database and PHP FPM, so that I have everything Moodle needs in that one spot. Just give me a second. So before I mentioned supervisor, now Docker, a common thing that's being done in Docker is, instead of running your services manager like services or system control in Unix, and I'm aware for those people who aren't familiar with Unix, this is probably going to sound strange. That's the process or the program in Unix that starts up all the stuff that you need to run Moodle, like starts the database when you turn it on, and starts the web server, and starts the PHP server. Supervisor is a very lightweight version of your full-blown one, and that's basically what's being used inside Ubuntu, inside this Docker image, to start all of those processes. Just switching back to screen sharing, I'll open up that file. You can copy it from another one. They're fairly simple to follow and understand. In my bash script, I've done a couple of things here. I'll come back to these ones in a second, but you can see the very last line, all I'm doing is starting supervisor and telling it what config file to use. In supervisor, and I started from an example of supervisor, so I didn't work all of this out myself. I'm starting up the supervisor controller. I'm not actually using SSH anymore, so I probably don't need that. I'm starting MySQL in safe mode. A very good tip, it took me at least a night to work this out. Supervisor needs things to run in the foreground where it can see them. Now, does everybody actually know what I mean by that? Possibly not. When you run a process in Linux, it goes to the background. It keeps running while you get on with other stuff. If it's in the foreground, it keeps, you're still attached to it, and you can see what is happening. Nginx and PHP FPM by default put themselves in the background, which means supervisor can't see them, and so it starts trying to run them again while they're actually running. The config files, I think this is only a half-hour session, so we're running out of time. The config files that are here do have the config right there where it says demonize no, to make sure those are running in the right mode, and daemon off. That will mean they run correctly. So if you download this file and pinch it, you'll be able and keep those configs, then it will start up properly for you. Okay. Okay, well, I'll probably use that. If you want more information on Docker, most of what I worked out was not actually Google searches. I went through the Docker tutorial, and that was fairly straightforward for me. Yes, without the ampersand. Nginx puts itself into the background whether you run it that way or not. Gareth, it comes out of the config, so that's what confused me. You actually need to go into the config file for Nginx and PHP FPM and tell them not to daemonize themselves. Otherwise, they just put themselves into the background and the supervisor gets upset. And then you wonder what you've done. Docker Hub is a really good place to go to find all the stuff people have pre-built all these images. So I probably didn't need to go to all this effort, but because there are actually a whole bunch of Moodle images on there. I think the reason I ended up doing it, A, was time, B, was so that I knew what I was on about, but also I wasn't 100% sure which ones were self-contained. So the most popular one here from, I actually am not sure how to say his name, you need to provide an external database. And I wanted, just for the demo, to be able to show you a setup that you didn't need to do anything, you just needed to start it and it would work. www.docker.com, that is actually Docker, that's where you can download it. So supervisor, yes, supervisor is actually orchestrating the startup. So it's, I'll go back, I'll screen share and go back to the config file. So this is the Docker, so this is the Docker config file. Hopefully everyone can see it. Each of these down here, each of these programs are one of the things that Docker is, that supervisor is starting up. You can see there's a priority setting there. I'm pretty sure that's, I haven't confirmed it, but that's the order that it's doing the startup in. I also commented out these standard out files. A common thing for Docker is to push all your logging file effectively to the output of the Docker container. So if you just attach to the Docker container, you're just going to get whatever's coming out of the log files. I disabled that for the moment. Now the last, that's me. The last thing I want to mention on that is when you start a Docker container, in this case, port 80 on your host machine is probably already running. So Docker will tend to need to attach to a local port so that you can get to it. So if I go Docker run, and here we go, live demonstration, let's see if it works, -P, capital P, that will automatically assign ports to everything. -D to put it in the background, because this is not what's happening inside the container. This is the container itself. I don't want to attach to it. I just want it to start and run on its own. Moodle, because it's the Moodle image that I want to run. Pretty sure that's everything. And I just run. That's actually now started. So if I go Docker PS, you can see up there, Thirsty Carson is running. Okay, that's not actually mapped to, sorry, let me do that again. At least I know it works now. Everyone can see now, hopefully. So let me do that again. So Docker images, I have a Moodle image, which you can see there. That's the one that I built with my Docker file. So I do Docker run, -P to attach the ports locally, -D to put it into the background, -T for the image I want to use, and I can just run it. Docker assigns names to all of them, as you can see on the end. Cranky Darwin there is the one that I just launched. That's so you can do things like Docker stop that image, rather than using the kind of anonymous image names. Okay. Once it's stopped, I need to use Docker PS-A to actually see all the images, not just the running ones. So Docker PS-A. And there's, as you can see, my Gerwood container I stopped a while ago. Docker run that. Sorry. Once the container already starts, you don't use run. Run is to create a new image, a new container from an image. I just start it back up. And it's back. Okay. Yeah, sorry, I decreased the screen size so that everyone could read the text, but it does cut off. I think it actually wraps them. Okay, that's more or less all of it. I realise there was a fair bit of brain dump in there. Does anyone have questions or things they want to bring up, make me go back and check, apologise for, etc.? Fair enough, Gemma. Yes. I realised there was a lot in there. I think the best way to start is you just go and get Docker, install it, try with the basic Ubuntu image. Again, if you